Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. I am here as ever with Francis and Tom. How are you guys doing this week? How has it been?
As always, doing very well. I think the last week has gone by so quickly. It literally feels like yesterday we sat down to record last week's episode. But that's partly down to the fact it's actually been a really busy week. And busy weeks normally mean that we've got some very good content to talk about. So excited for today's episode.
Amazing stuff. And how about you, Francis?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I feel like it really has flown by. And, as Tom said there, I feel like this week we really have had like a good variety of almost big news as well, not just sort of small little announcements. There's been some big players in the industry making moves. So it's definitely been an interesting week. And I think we're going to be talking about some of these interesting topics today.
Yeah, absolutely, which segues really nicely onto what our discussion points are going to be for today. So, guys, what are you going to be bringing to the table, Francis?
So today I'm going to be discussing Binance and its latest report on crypto adoption in Latin America.
Amazing stuff. And Tom, how about you?
This week it's all about Revolut's big news that it has finally obtained a UK banking license.
Fantastic. And I'm going to talk about new research about the UK embracing digital payments. Some interesting stories this week. Tom, I'm going to let you go first because I feel like that's a big name that you can't really just leave behind. So take it away.
It is. It's news that it's certainly been unescapable for me on LinkedIn. This is something everyone loves talking about. So I'm sure it won't be news to most of our listeners, but it makes for a good discussion point. But to kind of get started into it, obviously Revolut, which is the global neobank and fintech, has obtained its UK banking license from the Prudential Regulation Authority, or the PRA, more than 3 years after its initial application for one. So what does this mean? Basically, it means that Revolut should eventually be able to offer customers a far wider range of products and services, including mortgages and loans. However, this isn't going to be an instant thing. You're not going to see mortgage offers from Revolut in the next couple of days because, first of all, Revolut has to enter a restricted period known as the mobilization stage. And during this time, Revolut is restricted a number of ways. For example, it can only hold £50,000 of total customer deposits. But it does give the bank an opportunity to build out its UK banking operations before launching in the market. So with this in mind, Jen, it's just a brief overview of what's happened. I wanted to really see what you guys made of this and see what kind of impact that you think this news, which does seem quite big, is going to have on the UK banking sector. And also I'm interested, from a consumer standpoint, would it make you personally more likely to consider Revolut, or, would you have considered it just as well before it got the banking license? Francis, what's your take on this?
I think it definitely, I guess from an official standpoint, it obviously seems a little bit more, I don't want to say legitimate because there was nothing illegitimate about it before, but it definitely does give it this sort of extra level of credibility, I think. But in terms of actual usage and sort of customer base, I don't think that's going to change anything really, because I feel like if people wanted to, look at Revolut or sort of another sort of challenger or something like that, they probably would have done so by now. There's the hype around it has really been built up to a mainstream adoption. It's not a case of this is still a big alternative, I suppose. There are a lot of people that use these sort of financial institutions as their primary banking provider. And as a result of that, I don't think it's really going to change that much in terms of, well, as I said before, in terms of sort of actual customer adoption and sort of, an increase in growth. I think it definitely will help. And going forward, I think, as it expands, it's definitely going to be a big sort of part to sort of give itself credibility. But in terms of like an immediate change, I don't think it's going to have that much difference, no.
That's fair. I do feel like certainly I've seen people tweet about it, just, not necessarily that are in the fintech industry or the financial industry, but I feel like it has kind of captured some consumers' attention as well, because I think people are aware that there's greater protections that come with the banking license. So I do wonder if that'll be something that, makes people think, oh, Revolut is now an option where it wasn't before because I'm going to have greater protections than they were able to offer previously. For example, the financial services compensation scheme, they're now protected by that because Revolut has that banking license, which protects deposits up to £85,000. And I do think it's a positive thing. Like you said, I don't think there'll be a huge change, but I can imagine there will be a slight uptake, certainly in user adoption of Revolut accounts, and certainly as it expands its offerings, that will surely have a big impact on bringing people in as well.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, don't get me wrong for a second. It's definitely a good thing, and definitely I think it will help in the long term. I just meant sort of in the short, I
Yeah,
suppose, like next few months. I don't think we're going to see like a complete uproot in sort of banking providers, and that the traditional banks are going to lose all their customers as a result of it.
I definitely agree. I think the one thing this does do is really introduce increased competition for the banks. Not just the neobanks like Monzo and Starling, but it does give the traditional banks something to think about. Revolut's already a big name without the banking license, so maybe they'll be looking at them thinking, now they've actually obtained one in the UK, could they become one of the big names and really rival those sort of traditional options that people have? But Polly, what do you think? Are you kind of on the same train of thought as us, or are you thinking about it from a different angle?
Yeah, I think it's a really great announcement. Obviously, great for Revolut. Great to see them, moving forward in the industry. But I think I really do agree with both of you. I'm not sure how much uptake we're going to see, I guess, moving forward with Revolut. But I think what is interesting is, I guess, that is worth mentioning is how long it took them to get the banking license. So I think as we think about banking licenses, sort of now in this new age of fintech that's not really that new at all, but sort of in the last sort of 10-15 years or so, before Metro Bank got its banking license, whenever it did, there hadn't been banking licenses approved for years, and like literally like 100 or so years, I think it was. So like obviously the kind of getting a banking license is still quite a fairly new thing, but to wait 3 years for one is quite significant. And I wonder if that will have any sort of effect on consumer interest slash consumer trust. I think, if you know that something has taken a bit longer for one company, is that going to make you sort of question it a little bit more? Or is it going to make you feel a bit safer, I guess, in using it because you know that obviously it's been through a very rigorous process and still come out at the end of it with a banking license? So I thought that was just kind of like an interesting thing to know. But then I'd also like, do just like regular people know too much about banking licenses and know too much about, the how banking licenses are granted? So maybe it's sort of a bit of a moot point, but I think it's a very notable thing to bring up here. But I think offering the services that they offer, growing in the UK, improving the finances of their customers as one of their main goals. I think it's going to be really great to see what Revolut get up to. Whether or not it's going to be revolutionizing the UK fintech scene, the UK banking scene, we'll find out, I guess. But with such a big name breaking into the space, you can only sort of wait and see, I guess, what's going to happen. But props to Revolut for finally doing it, finally getting it, and hopefully they deliver on all the promises and all the things that they want to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the sort of perfect summary. Really, is it could be an exciting time, and as always, we'll wait and see what happens, what they bring to the table, and how they can impact the sector. But all in all, I think, like the initial article says, it can only be good news for consumers, and that increased competition and choice will hopefully bring good things for the UK market. So I think that's a good way to wrap it up. And with that in mind, Francis, why don't we go to your article?
So yeah, as the lead LATAM correspondent at the Fintech Times, I always really like to keep an eye out on the LATAM space, really, sort of how things are changing in Latin America, and what are the different payment preferences and sort of the different fintechs that are really being adopted over there. Because of course the markets there are incredibly different to what we know in Europe and sort of the United States as well, in America. And it is just really fascinating to me to see how much they really differ. And one of the big ways in which they differ is in terms of cryptocurrency and the way that they use it. So Binance, the global cryptocurrency exchange, published some findings recently on how Latin Americans are perceiving and using cryptocurrencies and the Web3 ecosystem. So the region has had a lot of adoption so far. And in fact, I think it was around 55, there are around 55 million cryptocurrency users in Latin America itself, which amounts to just about 10% of global adopters, which is quite significant when you sort of think about a region. And of course, in the grand scheme of things, you might say, that's still quite a limited amount, but it really isn't when you think about how it's being used, because Binance found out that there it's not sort of just one sector of sort of investors that are really looking to get involved with cryptos. It's all over the place. So you've got people that are looking to do long-term investments, you've got people that are looking to do day trading, people that are interested in sort of peer-to-peer transactions, or even people that are interested in covering their daily expenses and using cryptocurrencies as an alternative daily payment method. And of course, you've got the one that probably a lot of people know cryptocurrencies for, which are remittances. So there's a lot of ways that were revealed in the report, that cryptocurrencies are currently being used. But of course, adoption could always be greater. And Binance found that the primary two ways in which this could really be accelerated was through security and education. From a security point of view, there's a lot of sort of confidence in crypto exchanges and sort of just the ecosystem in general, which is often called into question. So it needs to really be improved in that way. And Binance explains how it is now requiring users to undergo a know your customer verification upon registration, and it will continue to invest in technology that protects users' wallets and funds, including multiple layers of security. And then from an educational standpoint, Binance explains how it's committing to releasing different content so that users can learn about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and enter the crypto market safely. So I know all of us have sort of dabbled in crypto before, some some of us more than others, perhaps. But I wanted to sort of see if you guys agreed with this, if this was something that you thought perhaps was exclusive to Latin America, or if we'd see similar trends around the world. And really, what is the big key to greater cryptocurrency adoption? Polly, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of the people who have not dabbled as much in cryptocurrencies. It's one of the things in fintech that I still can't get my head around, but that's okay. I think this is really interesting. I think we're always seeing, interest in crypto when it comes to the LATAM region, and I think having sort of a set of how to's, I guess, in terms of how we can get crypto there and get it to thrive, I think is really great. I do think personally, I think some of it's going to come down to the educational front, right? And I really liked that in the piece. Obviously, it talked about how the exchange is committed to releasing like content and other educational resources to help people understand about crypto and about blockchain and sort of how to be in the crypto market safely. And I think that's really, really important. And I think for me, that has got to be the key, because I think thinking about my own experiences obviously is very different to, if I was someone in LATAM or anything like that. But personally, it's I don't get it. And I think that's what's holding me back from like being in crypto more. So I think obviously if I feel like I don't get it, surely there's going to be other people that feel like they don't get it. So I think that's going to be really key. Absolutely. And just kind of really getting the training in, really getting the education in, and really letting people understand how they can use crypto. Because I think that's also a key as well. In that I think there's a lot of stigma around crypto, and maybe it needs a good marketing campaign to tell everyone like, hey, it's not just the stuff you hear on the news of like the big losses and people just investing in crypto and things like that. It is actually like a really useful tool that you can use for a lot of other things. And I think that is going to be a really key thing as well, is letting people understand that actually what use cases that you can have crypto in your everyday life, other than just buying a ton of Bitcoin and hoping that the value goes up. So that I think will be key as well. So I think, yeah, it's really interesting to see the growth. I think especially in Latin America as well, because it's such an interesting region when it comes to crypto adoption and just sort of in general like digital adoption as well. So yeah, I think it's a mixture of a lot of things, but it'll be interesting to see what works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on really there, that there is so much sort of variety really in the sector. But Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you've both made some really good points, and I completely agree with what you've already said. I think, like Polly said, the educational standpoint is going to be really important, uh, especially when it comes to not only getting people to adopt cryptocurrency in the first place, but also in understanding the risks that are associated with it. So that once they do put, let's say, a small amount of money in or a large amount of money in, and if they see a loss after a few weeks, they have the resources to understand why that might be the case. They understand that there are fluctuations, and it won't just put someone off from crypto and say, oh, well, you put money in, you lose your money, and then that's it, you're done. Understanding the other possibilities with crypto, how they can be used, whether it be for payments or remittances, is important as well. And I think that's going to be crucial in ensuring new adoption of crypto, especially while Polly said it does have this stigma existing. Obviously, there's a different culture existing, the financial ecosystem in Latin America, and that's why adoption is a bit different there. So they're going to have a different attitude towards crypto. But I think globally there is this kind of idea that stigma and about crypto, it's not necessarily the most trustworthy. There are risks associated with it, a lot more so than other financial options that are available. And I think Binance are going about it in the right way, just to build trust by saying, okay, we understand that there isn't necessarily a lot of trust in this sector, so they're going about it in the right way. They're working with the law enforcement agencies, they're introducing this educational aspect, and all the ways that they can approach it, they're trying to hit all the points there. And I think by doing that, the only way is up in terms of trust. And the higher that trust can be boosted, I think the greater adoption will become over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with both of you really, and that I think it is only. I know we always say it, and it feels like almost a cop out to say it now, but it is a time will tell type of thing. Like trust can only take place over probably more than just a few years, almost a decade or more. Like it's not going to be something that will just happen overnight. But I think the more people are aware of how to use things safely and like or how to use crypto safely, I should say. And as I sort of said after with Polly, is that it's really there is so much variety in how people can use cryptocurrencies. So understanding what best suits them and how they can best use it, it really is. It comes down to education, I suppose, and the more security that's there, like as highlighted in the Binance report, and as you both have sort of mentioned, that will only continue to bolster consumer confidence. And as you both brilliantly summed up, that's only a good thing. So yeah, why don't we go to your article next, Polly?
Absolutely, thank you so much. So, a slight divergent from crypto, but essentially, my article is all about new research from Marqeta, who has found that the UK is appearing to be more welcoming of a digital future, according to which has found that the UK appears to be more welcoming of a digital future. So I thought this was really interesting. So it's the fifth annual report from Marqeta, the 2024 State of Payments, and it has found that UK consumers are really quickly embracing a digital payment society. So 50% of respondents said they were feeling really positive about the changes, with another 50% saying that they had decreased their cash spending in the past year. And this was a lot more than their US counterparts. And I just thought this was a really interesting conversation because there's kind of a lot of buzz happening at the moment in the industry that I'm sure you guys have seen as well, not just within fintech, but kind of just in the wider world as well, in terms of like cash and digital payments and that kind of digital society. Obviously, after we had the global outage last week that saw some people being unable to make payments, and then that's just sort of been the latest and the biggest, I guess, headline in like a lot of other news stories that have been happening over the past couple of months that we've talked about, like different sort of major shops in the UK being unable to take card payments and things like that. So there's kind of still this whole conversation about what digital payments future is going to look like, what the future of cash is going to look like. And so I thought that would be a really interesting one to discuss today, obviously with this survey finding that, digital payments is almost the preferred payment method. Like it is thriving. Everyone's really loving using digital payments. Digital wallets are going up in popularity. 74% of people surveyed confirmed that they automatically add a new card to their mobile wallet, and 40% reported using a mobile wallet in the last week. So I just thought it was really interesting to kind of think about digital payments in this way and use this survey to kind of frame a wider conversation about, are we still going to see this kind of upkeep on digital payments, or has kind of like the recent news maybe going to affect things? Like maybe in Marketa's next survey, are things going to change a little bit? Are people going to go down, I guess? I mean, I just really kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it and kind of your thoughts on the landscape as a whole, because, after several years of going like really pushing to digital after COVID and that massive push to get everyone online, and now after, some significant issues in the tech, making people have to be unable to use digital payment methods, however temporary that may be. Has that kind of skewed things, do you think? Are we going to start seeing a change in opinion? I mean, Tom, what do you think?
I think it's a really interesting point to bring up, because obviously we see so much about the growth of digital payment methods, how people are adopting digital payments more and more. And yet you have these really big news stories, especially in the UK, where people are going, oh, well, I've gone, and the only way to pay with cash is because of these outages. We've had obviously the big IT outage last week with Microsoft, which didn't necessarily directly impact payments, but it just goes to show that some of the biggest, most interconnected services across the world can be affected in an instant, and that will really remind people that payments, there's always going to be potentially a place for cash. However, having said that, I do think the majority of people, I think you could probably say the same for us, is that they're aware that these kind of situations can happen, but frankly, the accessibility and just the how useful it is to have digital payments, have your digital wallet on your phone, is going to override any risk of, oh, maybe 1 to 3 days a year there might be an outage and I might not be able to pay as I usually do in Sainsbury's or whatever. I think there is that. I mean, certainly for myself, I think I'm willing to sort of almost take that risk and say I might run into trouble one day. But for the time being, while these services are available, I'm going to use them because they're very helpful. And maybe it might just be an idea for maybe take some cash out, have it somewhere in case there is an outage. But I don't know. I think considering how few outages we've had, I know in the last year or so we've had a sort of increased amount of them. Whether that's a trend that continues, that might impact people's decision. But I do think cash is going to remain on the downturn. And that actually reminds me of another article that we wrote this week about findings from UK Finance, which to sum it up basically said that it expects cash usage to, continue its long run declining trends that we've seen in recent years, and that digital alternative payment methods are going to continue to see a rise. And that's a trend that I sort of agree with. I do expect that to continue. And unless I think there's a huge increase in the amount of outages, I don't see there being a situation where people are just going to go, oh, I'm going to go back to cash completely. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a very small core of the population that say, okay, I'm going to use cash, extensively, and I'm only going to use cash. But I think the rest of the population is just going to grow and grow in using digital payments.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you've said there. I think you've raised some really interesting points. And one of the article that you spoke about was another one that I saw that kind of led into why I wanted to bring this up today, because I think it's one of those things, isn't it? And it's like how do you continue advancing in a digital age with everyone getting on board to digital, but then also navigating like the issues, because obviously, as we've seen, there can be issues, and there's something that you just kind of have to deal with. But I mean, Francis, what did you think about this one?
I think it's really interesting, primarily from like the point of view that, yeah, it almost makes you think that, like cash is going to return. The amount of times that we sort of think, there's so many problems with this. There's these risks that, we don't have with cash. But then ultimately you think, what's more convenient? And I think when you think about what we discussed last week with Apple Pay and how simple it is to really use, and that no matter how many sort of rivals it has on the market, we're going to just continue to use what's simplest and most accessible, what we're used to, and what continues to work 9 times out of 10. I feel like as a result of that, we're not really going to see much change in the long run in the UK, at least. I think the digital adoption and sort of the trends that we're seeing are only going to continue, and especially as I think a big part is, the next generation, as they sort of get access to tech and finances and stuff, they're going to continue to use whatever the latest technology is, and as that emerges, that's what's going to happen, and that uptake is just going to continue, and they're going to be the ones educating sort of the next generation, and so on and so on, until cash really isn't. I mean, I think it's always going to be there as sort of as a bedrock almost. I don't think it's ever going to be completely gone, but I just think we don't really see organizations being more accessible to cash, while they do continue to find new ways to be more accessible for digital payments. And as a result of that, I really think that we're just going to continue to see whatever's most convenient. People are going to innovate to keep that trend going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just said about businesses becoming more accessible to digital payments, soundbite that and save that, because that was the mic drop line right there. I loved it. But you're absolutely right, and I think it's just something I guess that we'll see play out in there as we go. And again, we've said that a lot, but it is something that you just kind of have to watch out for. But anyway, guys, that does bring us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much for bringing these articles to the table. If you want to hear any more about anything we've spoken about, head on over to fintechtimes.com, where there are plenty more news and insights over there. But very quickly, we will move on to what I learned this week. So each week we get so much new news, information, insights across our desks, being on the editorial team, that we thought it'd be fun to share that with our listeners. So, guys, what have you learned this week? Tom, what have you learned this week?
Well, it ties in quite nicely with what we've been talking today, with Revolut getting its banking license and talking about access to cash and are we going to see a cashless society. Well, Revolut has actually launched cash deposits for all of its UK customers in partnership with the global payments platform PaySafe, which means that people will be able to make cash deposits into Revolut accounts in over 12,000 locations in the UK, which maybe points to the idea that cash isn't going to die out just yet.
Amazing stuff. And Francis, what have you learned this week?
So this week I learned that the UK's current account switch service has revealed that it facilitated over 1.4 million changes in the past 12 months, which is up 10% from the previous year.
Fantastic. And what I learned this week is that a new S&X report found that 90% of respondents said that personalization encouraged them to encourage it with businesses, at least some of the time, which I thought was an interesting point about personalization of services. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me this week. It has been a pleasure to talk fintech with you as always. And then, I'll catch you on the next one.
See you guys next week.
See you guys then.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using hashtag TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.